Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 5 coverage of my games from the 2019 Southern California Open. So round 5 was Monday morning. I had a decent night's sleep, even though I had a pretty bad loss on Sunday night, I guess it was. But I was ready to go on Sunday morning and hoping to earn back a few points. So after 4 rounds, my score was 1.5 points. I could, if I won 2 games in a row, I could bring that up to 3.5 points out of 6. And so that's a little bit better than 50%. I would still probably lose rating points because my opponents are all lower rated. So that's not a great score, 3.5 out of 6 against all lower rated opponents. But it would reduce the damage to my rating, I guess. So I was definitely motivated to try and win. And once again, in round 5, I was paired down against a lower rated player. She was rated 1634 for this tournament, and my rating was 1837. So she started off with e4, and I played e6. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my opening choice. As I said before, I don't like to play e5 so much against the kids, even though that is one of my top tier defenses. Because the kids all know that. And even more in this case, I had actually seen her play a game against e5. She had white, she played e4, her opponent went e5. She played a Scotch Gambit transposed into the Max Lang attack and got a killer attack going. She actually had a completely winning attack. And but her opponent, who was an A player, managed to find a defense, or she didn't find the most accurate move at a critical point, and her opponent managed to defend and even win that game. So, but I could see she's a dangerous attacking player. So all the more reason not to play e5. I could have considered c5, of course, the Sicilian, but I had a bad experience with round 2, and I hadn't had time to go over the game yet and figure out what I had done wrong. So went with my third choice, the French defense. So she goes d4, I went d5, she goes e5, the advanced variation of the French. So I'm always happy to see the advanced variation. I think it's a little bit tricky for white to play, and it gives black a good game. I think it's technically it's better for white, of course, like most openings, but I think it's easier to play for black. So you just focus on undermining the center with moves like c5, knight to c6, queen to b6. Pretty straightforward plan, and then even the other knight can pile up on the d4 square. So she plays c3. This is all the main line. I go knight c6. She goes knight f3. So I'm putting pressure on the center. She's defending it. And I go queen b6. And now here she plays the move a3. And I think this is pretty interesting. She's been moving instantly up to this point. And actually she had done that in the earlier game as well that I saw. She just has her openings memorized up to a certain point and plays all those moves as fast as she can. So what I think is interesting is that a3 is not the most common move here. It is the most common move at the database, I should say that. So top choice in the opening database, and I'm sure it's very popular at the top level. In my own experience, I see bishop to d3 more often. It's an interesting move with the bishop on d3. It sets up some gambit ideas. So for example, after bishop to e7, you're actually threatening to take that pawn. You can't take it right away, so it sets a little trap. If you grab too soon, this bishop check comes at an inopportune time, and you lose a piece here on d4. So, but after bishop e7, you're really at d7, you're really threatening to take that pawn. And sometimes white will sacrifice that pawn. That's known as the Milner-Berry gambit. Or sometimes the bishop will move back to c2, or some other way will be found to defend on d3. Another way of playing it I've seen is people don't want to get into complications, just play bishop to e2. But I don't see a3. I guess people aren't that sophisticated normally in my circles. But this is the main move in the database. And so I didn't have a ready answer for this. I just played bishop to d7, continuing with my normal plan. But there are a couple of interesting continuations for black here. One is just to play c4 to c4, and just clamp down on the light squares here. Maybe the knight can maneuver in later. So this makes some sense, although I'm never sure when I want to lock up the center like that. But I guess I'm still going to be undermining the center this way. Another idea, though, which I think is more interesting, and maybe I'll try next time, is knight to h6. So it looks a little bit funny. Normally you don't want to play that because the bishop will just take it off and you'll be left with these doubled pawns here. But in this case, you can throw in an intermediate move, queen takes b2, hitting the rook. So the knight moves, so the rook is defended. Then you take the bishop. And, well, this position turns out to be good for black. It's a little bit awkward over here on the queen side. The queen is attacking a couple of loose pawns. And I guess the black's king must be safe enough in the center in this position. So interesting. I think I would try that next time. So after knight h6, white doesn't normally take the knight, but white plays b4. Then you do this exchange and play knight to f5. So it's a way of getting the knight to this f5 square where it puts more pressure on the d4 pawn, and kind of clever. So that's why that's worth a try. Anyway, after a3, I just went bishop d7, like I said. She goes b4 here, which is normal. I take, she takes, and I go knight to e7. So there's an interesting idea here in the opening book, which is to play rook to c8, and kind of waiting for this move, bishop to b2, which is the main move there, and then playing knight to a5. So taking advantage of this pin. Pawn takes knight, queen takes bishop, and then if the bishop is protected or moved or whatever, then the knight gets to the square on c4. The knight on c4 protected by the rook looks pretty good. So it seems like a nice way to play. I didn't spot that idea during the game. I just played knight to e7, which is okay. And she went bishop b2 here. I continued with knight to g6. Let's see. Actually, it's a little more accurate. Instead of playing bishop b2 right away, to play knight c3. And then I should go knight f5, and then knight a4, kicking my queen, kicking it all the way back here. I would have considered c7, but maybe that's a better spot. And then bishop b2. That's how the opening book goes at that point. So bishop b2 directly, we're just out of the book. Let's see, I continue with knight g6. The chess engine prefers knight f5. I'm really never sure about which one of those to play. The knight on f5 puts pressure on that d-pawn, but I'm not threatening to take it. It's adequately defended. So, you know, kind of my rule of thumb is I'll play this knight f5 move if I'm really threatening something, but otherwise I'll put it on g6 and try and go after the e-pawn. But in this case, the chess engine prefers a knight on f5. Anyway, I put the knight on g6. I mean, the downside of the knight on f5 is that sometimes it'll get kicked around with a move like that, or sometimes the bishop will come out and harass it. So it can be a bit awkward there. So you have to be pretty sure that it's safe to play it before you go there. Anyway, I go knight g6. She went knight to c3 and went bishop e7. The chess engine is also liking knight a5 here, although knight a5 to c4, she could trade it off there. Anyway, I went bishop e7, and she went g3. So that's an interesting move. I thought she was just trying to restrict my knight, prevent it from hopping into those two squares, but she actually had a different idea in mind. Notice that it's probably not about the fianchetto. This is not a particularly good diagonal for the bishop. It just hits, there's not much in the way of targets for the bishop on that diagonal. It's really better on this diagonal. So so there's a different idea with this pawn, and after I castle, she demonstrates what the idea is. She wants to play h4, and maybe she didn't want the trade czar. I think she could have played h4 right away, but it's very solid there, and it does prevent my knight from coming to this square. I mean, I only have two pieces on h4, and she's got the knight and the rook there. But maybe she didn't want the knight tied down. Anyway, h4 was played, and so now I have to consider the possibility of the hack attack over here on the king side with the h5. I thought about it. I did not think it was too serious at this point, and I played f6, just going ahead with my own plan, countering White's wing attack with a counterattack in the center, which is a classical formula. So she continues the h5, and I drop my knight back to h8. Looks pretty sad there at the moment, but well, it can come out to f7. It can get back in the game. So, and this pawn is momentarily stopped. So she continues with bishop to d3, and I take in the center. I take. The knight goes here. She doesn't take back right away, but the knight goes to a4, kicking my queen, and then she takes back. A pretty natural move, but in fact, taking back is a blunder. So this is a point where you might want to pause the video and think about it. It's Black's turn to move. What's the blunder, and how can Black exploit it? Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. The move here is rook takes knight, giving up the exchange, but it's just a temporary sacrifice because after the queen takes, I have knight takes e5, forking the queen and the bishop, but also unleashing an attack against the knight, which is loose over there on a4. So this is just winning. The queen has to move, and then I take the bishop with check. Queen takes, and then I take the knight. So I've gotten 2 pieces plus a pawn for my rook, and White's attack is not going anywhere at the moment. So let's go back and see what White should have played here. So yeah, everything was okay up to this point. The mistake was taking with the pawn. White really needed to take with the knight. And at this point, I can take back, I should, and unleash the bishop on the knight, but the queen is defending the knight, so there's nothing going on there. Pawn takes knight will be played, and then knight to f7, which defends against this pawn coming forward and puts some pressure on the center. And well, this is still probably about an even game, but maybe White still has an advantage. It looks like White has a bit more space, but certainly playable for both sides, and that's how the game should have continued. After d takes e5, it's nice to look at this now that I've shown you the tactic and see what's going on here. The idea, the very first move of giving up the exchange there is doing 2 things. It's undefending this pawn, but it's also pulling the queen away from defense of the knight, because the knight is not loose at the moment. It's defended by the queen, but after the exchange sack here, it becomes loose, and then then everything flows from there. After the queen is out of place, the knight is no longer defending the pawn. I can take back, hitting the queen and the bishop and the knight, and there's just too much hanging here, and White can't save everything. Well, White needs to save the queen. The bishop goes with check, and I take care. So just a winning position for Black, but White tries to make things complicated here. White continues with h6, and there's different moves I could play here. The chess engine says g6 could be played, which I thought about. It's kind of a nice way just to keep the lines closed, but it does open up this diagonal, and I wasn't so sure I wanted to go for that right away. I may have to, give up a pawn here to try and stave off that direct threat on the diagonal, because the queen can hop immediately onto that diagonal and threaten mate. So I went with knight g6, and this seems to be okay. And then she took the pawn here, and I played queen d7. I was thinking I wanted to try and push these pawns forward, and I was getting my queen behind the d-pawn so that I could push the e-pawn forward, supported by the knight, and I just didn't want to lose the d-pawn, so I played queen d7. But queen d7 actually is a blunder. I'll go ahead and put it on the board. Let's erase the arrows. So now see if you can find a good move for White here. Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. White played the move queen takes c6. And that's pretty frightening. Let's see. Instead of queen d7, I should have played something like rook to d8. That's a good move. It's another way of defending the d-pawn and enabling the enabling the e-pawn to come forward. It actually makes a lot more sense than queen d7, although queen d7 did defend the bishop. Or another move that I could have played here was queen c2, just go on the offense and offer to trade queens here. Anyway, I didn't play either of those. I played queen d7, and she played queen takes knight. And the problem is, after I take the queen, the rook comes down here with check, and then my rook is loose over here in the corner. That's why rook d8 would have been a good way to play the previous move. So I thought for a long time here. I thought about resigning. And then, well, I came up with an idea to make things interesting for a little bit. So I took the queen. White went with rook h8 check. King to f7 is forced. And then she grabbed the rook here, which is correct. This is all good play by white. I went bishop d8. This was my first idea, which was I have to stop this from queening. And the king actually is in a position to do that if I can block the rook out. But white has a good answer here, and she found it. Nice move, bishop to f6. So I can't take the bishop because of this pawn queens. The king is needed to defend against queening, so the king is kind of overloaded. And at the same time, it attacks my bishop, which is pinned. So I had another long think here, and thought about resigning again. But I found another idea to kind of keep things interesting for a bit. So I played queen to c7. She played rook takes bishop. That's correct. I played king takes bishop, and then white gets a queen. So it looks like I'm down massive amounts of material, but the idea with this queen c7 move is that I have a check and I get a rook back. So it's not such a big advantage to white as it first looks like. So that was the idea of that queen c7 move. So I get my check in, and now there's different ways for. Well, actually, I think there's only two moves, right? King f1 or king e2. If the king goes to e2, this is actually winning for black. A sudden turn of events results in a forced mate. The king has to go to d1. The bishop and the queen are cutting off all of the escape squares. And queen to d3. It continues on. There's like a mate in 5 or 6 from here. So it's not simple, but this is actually winning for black. But she played the other move, king f1. And that's the correct move. So I played queen takes a1 check. I get the rook with check. So it is queen and bishop against queen and rook. And I did get to take it with check. But the big difference in our positions is that white's king is relatively safe and my king is exposed. Let's see if we count the pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I have a pawn and a bishop for the rook, so it's near material equality. But well, I have an immediate concern here. It's my turn to move. This queen check would pick up my queen in the corner, so I need to do something about that. I played queen b1, and that loses, so it loses kind of quickly. I'll show that. Well, let's do that first. Queen f8 check was played, and this is a forced mate. So the king, if the king goes here, then queen here is mate, and if the king goes here, which is what I played, still the queen comes up to f4 check, king goes here, and queen here is mate, or also rook here is mate. So it's just a forced mate from that point. So queen b1 was not the most stubborn defense, but actually everything loses at this point. If I were to play queen to c1, maybe that's the best try, getting off that diagonal and getting off this diagonal. And then from this square, covering the key f4 square that the queen was using to checkmate me. This is still winning with queen h8 check. I'm sorry, not queen f8, queen h8 check. King f5. I said the right thing and moved the wrong thing. King f5. F3. F3 is the winning move here. So this might have been a little bit harder for white to find, although she was a pretty good attacking player. She did manage to find a lot of good moves. Anyway, I can throw in a check here with queen d2, but the king goes to h3, and there's no more checks. And my king is in a box here, surrounded by these pawns. It has nowhere to run, and the queen is cut off this square. The rook is coming over, or the queen is coming in. Something will happen, and I will get mated shortly. So yeah, the chess engine at this point staves off the mate by throwing material away, interposing the queen and things like that. So let's go back to the game. In the game, we played it out. She went king g2, I went queen b1. She went queen f8 check, I went here. Queen f4 check, I went to h5, and then queen h4 mate, and I resigned. So that's how that game ended. And I withdrew from the tournament after this. I think I have a rule that is designed to prevent me from losing too many rating points. And so one of the rules is if I lose 3 games in a row, then I withdraw. And another rule is if I lose 2 games to blunders, then I withdraw. So, if I lose 1 game to a blunder, like happened in round 4, that happens more often than not. But if I lose 2 games to blunders in a single tournament, then that's a sign that I'm in bad shape. And I count this as a blunder because after I played queen d7 here, but even before she made the move queen takes g6, I noticed it. So that's how you can tell that's a pretty clear blunder. I did not spend enough time evaluating my opponent's threats before making my move. So that's just not being in good form, not playing carefully enough, and maybe being a bit tired, who knows. But whatever it is, it's a clear sign that I'm not in good shape, and I withdrew from the tournament. So the result of this tournament, well, first of all, my opponent went on to win in the last round, I think. She ended up with a score of 3.5 out of 6, and her rating went from 1634 to 1720. You might say she shouldn't have won this game, but there was that previous game where she had a win and her opponent ended up winning. So I would say that was a pretty even trade in terms of getting results that she deserved. So I think a strong player, another strong player on the rise. Not as strong as a player I faced in round 2. I think probably a strong B player. I faced other B players like this that play very strong tactically, but then overlook their opponent's counterplay. She just missed my a tactic on f3. In fact, it resembles my style somewhat. Not that I attack like that, but that I tend to overlook my opponent's counterplay, and I tend to see my own tactical ideas more than my opponent's. So I think she just needs to work on that a little bit, and she'll be quite a strong player. Anyway, that was it for the tournament. I went for a hike, so the rest of this video is going to be a little bit of a travelogue. Oh, I wanted to mention my rating. So I've been saying all along my rating for this tournament was 1837. Actually, I had played in a tournament previously, and it had gone up to 1852. And then I lost around 50 points in this tournament, and my rating is now at 1801. So I stayed in Class B, but it's just by the skin of my teeth. Anyway, I wanted to do a little bit of a travelogue, so that's it for the chess in this video. So while I had some time off, I went for a walk at a local nature preserve. This is the Upper Newport Bay Nature Preserve. It's nearby. The tournament was in Orange County, near the airport, the John Wayne International Airport there. And Orange County has Disneyland. It has the UC Irvine, and it has beaches, but it also has this nice nature preserve. It's got hiking trails and biking trails. You can see. Is that I don't know if that's. I think that's just leading into the parking lot. I take that back. I was going to see if I had a shot of that. Anyway, there's some commemorative markers here and there, and then that's kind of a view of the bay looking towards the ocean. The ocean is in the distance that way, and you can hike all around it. That's a little bit more of a close-up. And then here I was walking around, and this is you can look across it. You can see it's a marshy bay, and then there's a lagoon at the end. So there's a river coming in. It's a mixture of salt water and fresh water, and from this side, I guess it's This is a view. Yeah, you can see some of the buildings of Irvine in the background, some of the business buildings there. Anyway, I thought it was a pretty scenic thing and a nice to do. If you're ever in Orange County, you might want to look it up. Anyway, that's it for for this little addendum, and I will see you guys later. Bye.